My family convinced my grandfather I was a drug addict so he would cut me out of his will. I didn't defend myself, but showed up at the reading with the recording that changed everything. It was a beautiful day in Boston. Sunny, 70 degrees, perfect. Late spring weather. The kind of day my grandfather would have spent in his garden, carefully tending to the heirloom tomatoes he'd been growing since before I was born. Instead, I was sitting in the ornate conference room of Blackwell and Hayes, the family law firm, surrounded by relatives who thought I wouldn't show up. The heavy mahogany door opened, and Mr. Hayes walked in, carrying my grandfather's will in a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My Uncle Thomas straightened his Brooks Brothers tie. Aunt Patricia adjusted her Tiffany pearls. My cousins Jennifer and Brad exchanged knowing smirks. My mother wouldn't look at me at all. "I see everyone is present," Mr. Hayes said, his eyes lingering on me for a moment too long. Even me," I said quietly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." I placed my tote bag on the floor beside me. Inside was a small digital recorder and a manila envelope, insurance policies of a different kind than what my family was expecting to cash in on today. When Mr. Hayes began reading, confirming that I had indeed been removed from the will just weeks before my grandfather's death due to concerns about substance abuse issues, my relatives couldn't hide their satisfaction. My mother actually sighed with relief. "I'm sorry, dear," Aunt Patricia whispered, not sounding sorry at all. "But you brought this on yourself." I just smiled and waited for my moment. Updated. Y'all, I'm completely blown away by the response to this post. Thanks for all the support and advice in the comments. To those asking if I had any warning before the will reading, absolutely none. My family kept me completely in the dark while they destroyed my relationship with Grandpa. Would you have confronted them immediately? If you were in my shoes? I'd always been the black sheep of the Wilson family. Not because I rebelled, quite the opposite. I worked hard, put myself through nursing school at Boston University, while my cousins partied at Ivy League schools on trust funds. I chose to live in a modest apartment in Dorchester instead of accepting the down payment my parents offered for a condo in Beacon Hill. I drove a 2015 Honda Civic while my relatives upgraded their BMWs and Range Rovers every 2 years. But my biggest crime? I genuinely loved my grandfather, Howard Wilson, not for his money, but for who he was. Grandpa Howard was different from the rest of them. He'd built his real estate empire from nothing, remembered what it was like to struggle, and never forgot his roots. While my family attended charity galas for the social connections, Grandpa quietly donated millions to addiction treatment centers across Massachusetts. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he'd tell me during our Sunday brunches at his back Bay Mansion, the only Wilson who didn't live to impress the neighbors. I was the only one who visited him weekly without being asked. The only one who knew how he took his Earl Grey with lemon, no sugar, or that he secretly loved watching cooking competitions on TV. I was also the only one who followed in his footsteps of actual service, working night shifts in the ER at Mass General Hospital while volunteering at Horizon House, a rehab facility in Roxbury, on my days off. That's where this whole mess started. 3 months ago, I was helping with a community outreach day at Horizon House. We took photos for the newsletter, me with my arm around former addicts who'd turned their lives around, me administering Narcan training, me handing out pamphlets on a street corner known for drug activity, all perfectly innocent, all part of my job. I even brought Grandpa the newsletter during one of our brunches, and he proudly put it on his fridge, next to a finger painting I'd made him when I was 7. 2 weeks later, he stopped answering my calls. When I went to his house, the housekeeper, Maria, who'd known me since I was in diapers, wouldn't look me in the eye as she told me, "Mr. Wilson isn't receiving visitors." When I pressed, she whispered, "Your mother and Mr. Thomas were here yesterday. They showed him pictures." He was very upset. That night, my cousin Jennifer, always the weakest link, drunk texted me, "OMG, so crazy about Grandpa cutting you off. But honestly, what did you expect with your lifestyle choices?" It didn't take a detective to piece together what had happened. My family had taken those Horizon House photos and twisted them into evidence that I was secretly an addict. To my 92-year-old grandfather, who could barely use his iPhone and certainly wouldn't think to verify what he was being told, those pictures of me with former addicts would look damning if presented the right way. I could have stormed in, demanded to see him, tried to explain. But I knew my family. They would have intercepted me, twisted my words, made me look desperate and defensive. So I did something else entirely. I waited. And I planned. And I listened. The next day, I bought 3 small recording devices from Best Buy. 2 weeks of nursing overtime paid for them, a small price for what I was about to do. I knew my family would be gathering at Grandpa's house for their weekly family dinner, an event I'd stopped being invited to years ago when I refused to pretend to be impressed by Uncle Thomas's new yacht. Getting inside was easy. Maria had always left the garden door unlocked for me when I brought Grandpa his favorite scones from Tot Bakery. The hard part was placing the recorders where they wouldn't be found. One under the massive dining table where they always discussed family business, one in the study where the drinks and real conversations happened after dinner, and one in the least ethical place of all, taped under Grandpa's medication tray on his bedside table. That last one made me queasy. But I knew they would talk to him alone. I knew they would feed him more lies when no one else was around. And I needed to hear it all. Then I walked out, went home, and waited 3 more days before retrieving them during the housekeeper's day off. What I heard destroyed me. "He's buying the whole drug addict story." My Uncle Thomas's voice came through. The first recording. The clinking of ice in what was undoubtedly his usual double scotch clear in the background. Dad's always been touchy about addiction, especially after what happened with Beth. Beth was my father's sister who died of an overdose before I was born. The family's deepest shame, never discussed except in whispers. "I still can't believe those photos worked so perfectly," my mother replied, her voice almost giddy. "When I saw that newsletter, I knew we had gold. All we had to do was pull them out of context." The one of her on the street corner was particularly inspired. "Aunt," Patricia chimed in. "Who would have thought her precious volunteer work would be what finally gets her cut off?" They laughed. They actually laughed. "How much do you think the old man is worth now?" Brad asked. "The Seaport properties alone must be at least $50 million," Uncle Thomas interrupted. "Plus the liquid assets, the art collection. We're looking at close to $100 million when it's all divided up. Without her taking her chunk, that's an extra $20 million for the rest of us." "To think she could have had it all if she'd just played along," my mother said, sighing. "But no, she had to be authentic and make her own way. Well, look where that got her." The second recording was worse. It was Aunt Patricia and my mother, in Grandpa's room. "Howard, I brought more evidence," Aunt Patricia said, her voice gentle but insistent. "I hate to show you these, but you need to know the truth about your granddaughter." "I don't want to see any more." My grandfather's voice was weak, confused. "She wouldn't. Not after Beth." "I know it's hard," my mother said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "But look, this is her leaving that drug house in Roxbury, and these needle marks on her arm, those aren't from her nursing job." I gasped out loud when I heard that. Needle marks? I had a small birthmark on my forearm. They were showing him doctored photos. "She needs help, Dad," my mother continued, "but she won't get it as long as she thinks she'll inherit your money. The kindest thing you can do is cut her off completely. It's the only way she'll hit rock bottom and finally get clean." "Maybe I should talk to her first," Grandpa said, and my heart leapt. "We tried that," Uncle Thomas's voice now. "She denied everything, got aggressive. The lawyers say it has to be a clean break. No contact, no money, nothing." The third recording was the most damning. It was from the study, just my uncle and my cousin Brad. "Did you take care of the paperwork?" Brad asked. "All set," Uncle Thomas replied. "Hayes brought the amended will yesterday. The old man signed it without even reading it carefully. Too broken up about his precious granddaughter turning out to be a junkie. And she has no idea? None. By the time she figures it out, the will be executed, the money distributed, and it'll be too late for her to contest anything." "Genius," Brad laughed. "Absolutely genius. Best con we've ever pulled." I listened to these recordings a dozen times, crying, raging, then finally, planning. I checked my grandfather's medical records at the hospital. Ethically dubious, yes, but desperate times and all that. His doctors had him on morphine for the pain. He was confused, heavily medicated, vulnerable to suggestion. No wonder he believed them so easily. I printed out employment verification from both the hospital and Horizon House. I got reference letters from my supervisors. I even got a clean drug test, notarized and official. Then I reached out to a lawyer, not one connected to my family, and laid out everything. "They've committed elder abuse, fraud, and defamation," she told me. "But proving it will be difficult unless I have recordings," I finished for her. I slid my phone across her desk. "Like these." Her eyes widened as she listened. "This changes everything. But timing is crucial. You can't show your hand too early." The day my grandfather died, I wasn't allowed to see him. I stood outside the family mansion in the pouring rain for 2 hours before security asked me to leave. At the funeral, I sat in the back row while my family delivered tearful eulogies about how much they loved the man whose money they'd been salivating over for years. Not one of them mentioned Beth. Not one of them talked about his philanthropy. They didn't know him at all. Which brings me back to that sunny day in the law firm's conference room, with Mr. Hayes reading the will that cut me out entirely, due to concerns about substance abuse. When he finished, Uncle Thomas cleared his throat. I think we all understand why these difficult decisions had to be made. Now, as to the distribution of... Actually, I interrupted, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. I think there's something you all should hear first. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the mahogany table. This is a recording from Grandpa's study, 3 weeks ago. The color drained from Uncle Thomas's face as he heard his own voice. The old man signed it without even reading it carefully, too broken up about his precious granddaughter turning out to be a junkie. Then Brad. Best con we've ever pulled. The silence when I stopped the recording was absolute. Mr. Hayes looked stunned. I have more, I said quietly, pulling out the manila envelope. Employment verification, reference letters, a clean drug test, and most importantly, the original Horizon House newsletter, showing exactly where those photos came from, my volunteer work at a rehabilitation center. I laid everything on the table. You set me up. You lied to a dying man about his granddaughter. You committed fraud, elder abuse, and defamation, all documented right here. And you did it for money. My mother found her voice first. You recorded us without consent? That's illegal. You can't. Massachusetts is a two-party consent state, I agreed. These recordings wouldn't be admissible in criminal court. But for a civil case challenging the validity of a will executed under false pretenses and fraudulent information, or for the board of the Howard Wilson Foundation to understand exactly who they're dealing with, they'll work just fine. Updated. Okay, folks, this is getting intense. Many of you are asking what happened after I played the recording. Let me tell you, the looks on their faces were priceless. Uncle Thomas turned so red I thought he'd pass out, and my mother completely lost it. Question time. Would you have gone straight to the police with the recordings, or handled it the way I did by confronting them at the will reading? I'm still second-guessing my approach sometimes. The next hour was chaos. Uncle Thomas threatened lawsuits. Aunt Patricia cried theatrical tears. My cousins stormed out. My mother just sat there staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Mr. Hayes, to his credit, immediately stopped the proceedings. In light of this extremely concerning evidence, I have no choice but to temporarily halt the execution of this will, he said, his lawyer's composure failing him slightly. Ms. Wilson, may I have copies of everything you've presented today? I nodded. My lawyer has already prepared a complete package for you. Your lawyer? Uncle Thomas sputtered. Who the hell would represent a wrongfully accused victim of familial fraud? Came a voice from the doorway. Angela Chen from Donovan and Chen, the top estate litigation firm in Boston, stood there with a leather briefcase that made Mr. Hayes's look shabby by comparison. I would, and it's my pleasure. I hadn't planned that entrance, but Angela had perfect timing. This is absurd, Aunt Patricia said, frantically reapplying her lipstick as if proper appearance could save her now. Howard knew exactly what he was doing. He was of sound mind. Was he? Angela countered, pulling out more documents. According to his medical records, he was on high doses of morphine in the weeks before his death. His doctors noted periods of confusion and disorientation. And mysteriously, his regular nurses were replaced with private staff hired by... Oh, look at that. You, Mr. Wilson. She nodded at my uncle, whose face went from red to gray. You can't prove any of this influenced his decision, my mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. Perhaps not beyond a reasonable doubt, Angela agreed. But the civil standard is preponderance of evidence. And we have quite a preponderance, don't we? Mr. Hayes had been flipping through the papers I'd given him, looking increasingly disturbed. There's something else, he said slowly. Something that doesn't make sense. He pulled out my grandfather's original will, the one from before their manipulation. You weren't the primary beneficiary to begin with. That stopped me cold. What? Your grandfather left the bulk of his estate to the Howard Wilson Foundation for Addiction Recovery and Second Chances, Mr. Hayes explained. You were to be named the executive director with a generous salary and living stipend, but not a direct heir to the fortune. The only thing that changed in the amended will was removing you from the foundation leadership and replacing you with the family members present here today to serve as a board of directors. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. All of this, the lies, the manipulation, the doctored photos, and I was never going to be a multimillionaire anyway. I'd been set to run a charitable foundation, exactly the kind of work I already did for free. Let me get this straight, Angela said, barely containing her own smile. You committed fraud and elder abuse to prevent your niece from running a charity? You don't understand, Uncle Thomas said, sweat beading on his forehead. The foundation has an annual operating budget of nearly $30 million. The person who controls it controls the good it can do in the world, I suggested. The lives it can save? The people it can help? My mother finally looked at me, really looked at me. You didn't know either, she said quietly. You thought he was leaving? You the money directly. I met her gaze steadily. I never thought about the money at all. I just didn't want him to die believing I'd become exactly what he spent his life fighting against. The room fell silent. Well, Mr. Hayes said finally, it seems we have a serious legal situation on our hands. In the weeks that followed, it all unraveled for them. The evidence was too damning. The amended will was contested, with Angela arguing that my grandfather had been unduly influenced, while in a vulnerable medical state. The irony was that I wasn't fighting for the money. I was fighting for his true wishes to be honored. The court agreed to a surprising compromise. The original will would stand, with the foundation receiving the bulk of the estate, but with one significant change. Instead of a family board of directors, a neutral third party would oversee the transition, with me still assuming the role of executive director after a one-year probationary period. My family didn't go to jail. Massachusetts law made the recordings inadmissible in criminal court, just as I'd said. But they lost something more valuable than their freedom. They lost their reputation and standing. The Boston Globe ran a tastefully vague story about irregularities in the Howard Wilson estate settlement. It was enough to get them dropped from the boards and charity committees they'd built their social lives around. That was 2 years ago. Today, the Howard Wilson Foundation is thriving. We've opened 3 new treatment centers, launched a legal aid program for people falsely accused of crimes, and started a scholarship fund for nursing students specializing in addiction medicine. My mother called yesterday, our first conversation since the will reading. She wanted to meet for coffee, said she had something important to tell me. I agreed to see her next week, not out of forgiveness, but curiosity. Angela advised against it, but some doors need proper closing. Uncle Thomas moved to Florida, reportedly working on a memoir about family betrayal that no publisher will touch. Aunt Patricia divorced him 6 months after the scandal and is now dating her tennis instructor, 20 years her junior. Brad works at a car dealership in Rhode Island, not the career trajectory he'd planned with his share of $100 million. Jennifer surprisingly reached out with a genuine apology last Christmas. She's the only one I've considered letting back into my life. As for me, I still drive my Honda Civic, still live in my Dorchester apartment, though I could afford much more now with my foundation salary. Some habits die hard, but I sleep better knowing I honored my grandfather's true legacy. Not the money, but the belief that everyone deserves a second chance, even family. Sometimes I visit his grave and tell him about the lives we're saving together. I like to think he knows the truth now, that he understands what really happened. And on my desk at the foundation office, I keep a small framed photo of us from when I was little, both of us covered in dirt from planting those heirloom tomatoes in his garden. On difficult days, it reminds me why all of this matters. I never got my family's love and approval. But I got something better. The chance to build the kind of legacy that would have made my grandfather proud. A legacy that has nothing to do with mansions in Back Bay or summer homes on the Cape, and everything to do with seeing people for who they really are, not who you fear they might become. Updated. This will be my final update on this wild journey. So many of you have asked if I ever confronted my mother about why she participated in the scheme. I did meet her for coffee last week, and what she told me was heartbreaking. But that's a story for another time. Thank you all for your incredible support and advice throughout this ordeal. I have one final question. If your family betrayed you like mine did, could you ever truly forgive them, or is maintaining distance the healthier choice?